to IBD's podcast, Past, Present and Future. So today I'm delighted to say that my guest is Ian Hamilton. Ian is a master brewer with an extensive, successful international career in the brewing industry spanning over 40 years. Now, Ian started at Smithwick's, Kilkenny, Ireland, and later he joined Guinness, worked in Africa, spending over 13 years in Cameroon, Ghana, and Nigeria before returning to Kilkenny as head brewer and site director in 2001. Now, since leaving Diageo in 2014, Ian has been involved in training for IBD exams and as a master brewer for Sullivan's Brewing Company. As master brewer, he went on to win Gold and Champion International Keg Ale at the prestigious International Brewing Awards in 2016 and 2017. Ian's been a member of the IBD since beginning his career back in the 80s, and he achieved master brewer qualification in 2018 and became a fellow at the Institute. As one of the IBD's most seasoned trainers, Ian's expertise as a tutor is absolutely invaluable for our diploma and brewing candidates. Ian, welcome, and thank you for your time today.
That's my pleasure, and thank you very much, Tom. The Institute's been good to me over decades, so it's nice to be able to give something back.
Perfect, and we're going to dig right into that. So just give me a sense of that then. That's a great starting point in terms of what does the IBD mean to you, and how has it been a part of your journey?
Yeah, in simple terms, I suppose the IBD provides a sort of fellowship thing for me with the other brewers, people that I wouldn't otherwise meet. We can meet up once a year or whatever, our different talks. That's nice. But from early days, it was kind of from day one in the brewing world, it was made clear to me that the exams were the route to credibility and survival and thrival, I hope, in the company. So the associateship, as it was called at the time, and then followed by the Master Brewer, which they've changed names now. Master Brewer is now Diploma, Master Brewer, and so on. But involved in those was important. And it was kind of interesting because I sat the first exams while I was still, I think I was maybe the brewer in charge of the yeast block or something in Kilkenny at the time. But by the time I came to try and sit my final masters, I was in Cameroon. So the British High Commission sent an invigilator to the brewery, and I was the sole candidate from Cameroon. And I'll never forget it because I was a huge air-conditioned room. I was shivering through the entire exam. But eventually, with a few stones in the road, but eventually, got the master brewer. So that was
tell us a bit about that journey in terms of from Kilkenny to Africa and then back. What was the thinking about? Why did you make those choices? What was it you were looking for as a brewer?
Well, it's funny. I remember at the time when Guinness came to the university interviewing graduates or soon-to-be graduates, when they talked about careers in places like Nigeria and so on. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. And I could see them getting, leaning back in their chairs and saying, we found one, So for me, I was always keen to travel, and Africa was always the place I'd like to see most. Funnily enough, it remains like that. It's the continent I have most affection for, really, and like visiting and so on. But so Africa was actually a big attraction to me, and even joining Guinness, because Smithwick's was part of Guinness even from day one, when I joined, I mean. So that was always part of the plan. And then in 1985, there was Guinness used to run this international brewing school where brewers from around the world within Guinness would come together for a few weeks. So I went on that as a very young, so I was 26 maybe. And again, just it reinforced my wish to get out there as soon as I could. So I was, and I learned a lot because of the hiccups along the way, because the role was to be in the Ogba brewery, which was the jewel in the crown in Lagos. But there were difficulties with visas, politics. I think there might have been a coup in Nigeria around then. All sorts of things happened so that the Nigerian job never actually came about. By then I had left Smithwick's and was kind of kicking my heels in Park Royal Brewery and so on in London. But eventually then a role came up in Cameroon. And I was, Guinness were kind enough to say, well, that's not what you joined up for. So would you like to go to Cameroon? And if you wouldn't, we can send you to a job in Dublin, if you like. But I said, no, Cameroon, absolutely. So that was brilliant. It was a wonderful place to start. It was, I mean, the lifestyle in Cameroon was excellent, very friendly people, of course, a very beautiful country.
Internationally, that so many Brits that I've spoken to speak so fondly of their international experience and what it gave to them, both in terms of their own personal development, their life experience. I love going to an IBD dinner, and then before you know it, the stories are coming out in terms of remember when we were here or what have you. So that's great.
Yeah.
And then talk to me a bit about how your relationship with the IBD has transitioned from you being educated to that sense of fellowship, and now you playing that forwards and being such a kind of important part of our kind of tutoring team.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It definitely is a different chapter. Once I elected to leave Diageo back in 2013-14, I was looking around for something to do, partly to earn money and partly something to do. And so I got involved with consulting as a brewer. And then I was helping with lecturing in Ireland. That was one of the first things I did, was to work with an IBD stalwart, Tim O'Rourke.
Oh, yeah.
So I worked with and for Tim, if you know what I mean, like delivering some of his on-site training in Ireland for him. And then the institute, I can't remember how, but there was a residential course run in the HQ, which I was invited to. I can't remember exactly how to deliver, and I really, really enjoyed that as well. Yeah. So, and then the tutor guided learning diploma program kicked off, and I've been in that from the beginning and really enjoy it. It's so it's quite different from being a production manager, head brewer, that sort of thing, to teaching. But I come from a line of teachers as well. I suppose that there must be something in the genes. My father actually founded a school, which is still there. There is a Hamilton High School in Bandon in County Cork.
Well, that's just wonderful. And I think it is quite interesting because both of my parents are teachers, or actually my father's just sadly passed away. But I think there's something about recognizing the importance of education and, the kind of striving to kind of improve yourself and to learn new things. It's one of the great kind of opportunities that life grants you to kind of learn new stuff and then to pass it on to other people. And so on that vein, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's just entering the industry, and how might the IBD be able to help them with that?
It's as I'm sure you understand, it's quite a big question. When I was thinking about this earlier, I thought, well, it depends on whether that person is starting off in a multinational big beer company or whether they're starting off in more of a craft environment. I think if they're starting off in a big beer company, international, I would say it would be a very good idea to develop and maintain an interest in things like home brewing, craft brewing, keep an eye on what's going on in the micro scene, build a network, for which the IBD is becoming more and more relevant. Kind of visit them and so on. And the purpose behind that is to avoid the silo problem of multinationals, because with the best will in the world in a multinational, you might be second brewer in one section of the fermentation block for 2 years or 3 years. You could rapidly forget everything you ever knew about malting, and you may never get to see a bottling line. And so I think that there's a great benefit in visiting and having networks in smaller outfits when you're building your career in a multinational. But there are also the positives. What did I gain from working for a multinational? Well, it's the ideal place to learn statistical process control, to understand the nitty-gritty of compliance, of labeling, of international legislation for labeling, permitted additives and aids, and all that sort of stuff. Also, much better structured generally for your own professional development. I mean, HQ always has a new program that they want you to deliver. So you always have to kind of learn the new language, and that could be on human resources, it could be on coaching, but it could also be technical. So there's an awful lot to be said for an international career. But just to maximize your opportunities in the multinational, but don't forget that brewing is a craft, and it's all about the beer and people being able to enjoy it.
And as a tutor for our kind of tutor guided learning, do you think that's something that the IBD is going to have to kind of increasingly address the kind of differences within the industry. So to produce courses that are more appropriate for one type than another type, because I think in the world that we live in, one size fits all. People have an expectation that the education that we provide for people will be tailored to their needs. And so although the theory may be the same, people will need to be able to see themselves in the qualifications that they're taking. And do you think that's a challenge for the IBD in terms of moving forwards?
I think, it's a challenge. I think it is even more so a challenge for the students, because, to take an example, if we're studying brewhouse on the IBD diploma, for example, we will look at, in major terms, traditional mash tuns, traditional outer tuns, and the mash filter brewhouses. But there are other technologies, and sometimes there are hybrid technologies, which the smaller breweries often are spearheading or using, but they don't form part normally of the training agenda. And that's sometimes for a good reason, because we've all learned that you can overload the student. If you give them, for example, 10 different ways of adjusting the ionic composition of brewing water, they will remember none of them. That it's important to stick to a few basics, and then if it's not in the syllabus, don't throw it in. Don't confuse people is a good principle, but it does mean that as a brewing student, where do you learn about those other things? Well, you do it, for example, by reading the Institute of Brewing's BDI magazine, and by having your network in small breweries and so on. So I think it's partly a syllabus and training issue for the Institute, but I wouldn't go too far down the customizing route personally, because you can overload people. That's different to your question, which is tailoring is okay, but perhaps I'm contradicting myself a little bit here. I think for the professional brewing qualifications, it's important to get the basics right and avoid the rabbit holes. But when you're tailoring to an individual company or group of students, then we should be flexible enough to.
And I think a lot of the things that we're talking about at HQ is, how do we almost become the editor-in-chief of all of this educational content, so that people can easily find the stuff that is relevant to them, on top of really strong kind of fundamentals at whatever level they choose to do. So it's about, and I think we're agreeing that you can't create a tailored program for absolutely everyone, but people should be able to find the expert content that we got, whether that's through the BDI, whether that's through attending an event, whether that's through education or a short course or what have you. And so it's making that accessible, working out what people want and making that accessible, I think, is really important. And just to go back to the starting point, I recently came across to the Irish section annual meeting, and then the dinner and the meeting took place at the Heineken Brewery in Cork, and it was fabulous. And you had a whole room full of people just from all sorts of different companies and organisations, sharing the common language, having a great chat, and what have you. So that sense of the IBD being everyone's invited, welcoming everybody, I think is really important. And then, so Ian, we probably talked about it a bit, but
that sparks a thought. That, of course, when I joined, there were two bodies. There was the Incorporated Brewers Guild, and then there was the Institute of Brewing. Now, they've, as you, of course, amalgamated within the current IBD. But the Guild was more of the social and, in theory, sort of professional standing kind of organization. The Institute benefited enormously, or the merged body now looked after both. So I think the Institute has continued the social and kind of convivial bit that the Guild was so good at. And I think you experienced the Irish do it in our own way over here. But it's still, the events I've attended in Africa or in Britain equally have always been a pleasure. But I think compared to the black tie events of 20 years ago, in some UK areas, for example, the idea of craft and the more relaxed, informal approach certainly removes a psychological barrier for a lot of students from smaller breweries and that kind of thing. So I think that's important. The other thing is, if I was to revisit my wise old grandfather approach as regards somebody starting in a craft brewery as opposed to a multinational, I would say the Institute is just, if not even more important, because sometimes big breweries like, say, ABI or somebody will have in-house training and documentation second to none anyway. But in a craft brewery, I think the young brewer should commit herself, I think, to the IBD exams and the IBD standard as a self-investment. Even if their brewery doesn't value it, do it yourself. Look after your own development, scientific basis for your future brewing, and then you have the benefit of things like the IBD membership journals network and so on as well.
Yeah, and I think to go back to Ireland, the Southern section recently put on a study tour where they.
I was at that. I joined them. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. And it's just to me an example of the IBD at its very best. And people like Steve Wilkinson, and who's on the secretary of the Southern section, he's always been very keen in terms of making these events accessible, so that members, making it affordable, because these are tours that are just incredible opportunities for young people, for young and old people who are entering the industry to get a real flavour and a range of different experiences. So, and then in terms of the black tie dues, I love those. It doesn't need to be black tie, but I think some of the nicest moments of my role is when we give out the prizes, give out the certificates and stuff like that. And it's a moment where people's faces light up, and I love that. I think that's a really special thing that we need to hang on to, but we need to do it in a way that's not inaccessible. And so in terms of, we probably hinted at a few things, but what do you think is the essence of the IBD when it's at its best?
Well, one thing I was thinking about is what were my own favorite moments with the IBD, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and I guess you mentioned the fellowship was excellent. I was delighted to become a fellow. But one of the earliest ones would be there was a study tour to Germany, to Bavaria, back in the 1980s, which I went on. Shortly after I went to Cameroon, I was able to stitch it in with holidays. And that was a week in traveling around basically Bavaria and seeing all their breweries and so on. But that was a wonderful week, and an opportunity to learn so much, but also just it was great to be back with a large group of brewers, some very keen to learn, some keen to enjoy themselves, and some, like myself, keen to do both. And it was very eye-opening, I think, to see, if you like, traditional German brewing up front, because I think we'll all admit that kind of the British-Irish IBD learning is actually a little bit different to how the Germans do it with their folk. They sometimes include more of the engineering, and they're very. I don't think anyone will object if I say that they don't value flexibility, perhaps in the same way that brewers on this side of the channel do. That if a way works, why would you change it? Might be more characteristic of continental brewing, and there's actually a lot of strength in that. It's good to understand what they do.
Yeah, and I think on a broader educational perspective, I went to a kind of presentation yesterday, and somebody was talking about the very difference in terms of management approaches in the US, in the UK, in Europe, and places like that. And so her point, and she knew her stuff, was that in the UK, there's quite a lot of accidental managers who were originally a technical expert and then fell into management because they were really good at it, and some of that they have to develop the new skills. Whereas in other places like Germany and America, the ones that she called out, where there's an absolute learning and education into the discipline of managing, and for some roles you can't apply for it unless you've got some of those qualifications. So I think that sense of getting the IBD being a broad church that offers a diverse range of approaches to the same kind of objectives or the same kind of process is really very special. And I would always say that the network that the IBD brings is something that we have to kind of nurture very carefully and look after, because it's what makes the IBD very special. And then in terms of that we've talked quite a lot about face-to-face. So if you've got any reflections about the change from the transition from offline education to online education, any reflections on that in terms of what's good about it, or have we lost anything by doing that?
So it's a very interesting question, and a lot of it's been accelerated, of course, with the COVID and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
on
yeah.
over those recent years. I'm just thinking back. I guess most of my brewing education, I was kind of sent on 1 or 2 one-week programs or whatever
Yeah,
to England, from Ireland, and that was about it. Otherwise, it was learning from little blue books that the institute used to publish. So it wasn't even face to face.
yeah,
It was solo study with an occasional course if you were lucky, as I was, to attend them. But those courses are some of my happiest memories, because you were, in
yeah.
that atmosphere with other brewers face to face, seeing lovely old breweries around England, real old style, some of them still in use, learning traditional, or seeing at least how a traditional Victorian brew house even was run.
Yeah.
Um, so uh, how could I? Yeah, I'm not sure what else to add to that, to be honest.
Yeah. I think there are a
Well, I
lot,
like. Sorry, well, sorry, if I could, sorry.
yeah,
Back on track. The online is certainly more convenient for the tutor,
yeah.
um, but face to face obviously has some benefits as well. I'm beginning to sound like Father Ted, that you should be a little bit this and a little bit that. But I think that the face to face and the conviviality would be a shame for young brewers to miss.
Yeah,
Although they're better at networking perhaps than my generation were.
yeah, but we have to provide access to that, and I think the sections do a brilliant job in that respect. I think one of the things that we hear back from students at the moment is about time commitments. It takes a lot of effort and work to invest in the IBD qualifications. So by making those as accessible and convenient as possible, there are some benefits to that, and also in terms of from a sustainability perspective, we're not sending papers here, there, and everywhere. So
Yes.
there's lots of benefits, but we're really keen and careful to maintain the network. And we had a couple of really great big events post-COVID last year. We had the Asia Pacific Convention in Adelaide, and then we had the WDSC up in Edinburgh. And it was just, you could just sense people were really happy to be back together with each other. And so just, Ian, give me a sense in terms of what you think the opportunities are for the IBD moving forward.
Well, there are many. There are many, I guess.
Or put it, where would, if you were me, where would you be focusing? What do you think? Look, actually, make sure you get this right.
I think that the trend over the last few years, as I've observed it, things like, well, the brewers gracing the front of the magazine don't look like me anymore. It's quite rare to see a white coat or a grey beard, whereas that was almost the norm, wasn't it? The stale and male kind of brewer was the image. So it's good to that the rebranding, if you like, has gone authentically well, because people like that are joining and are playing a huge role and so on. So that's good on the appearance, and which is everything. If we look forbidding and crusty, then that's the battle lost on day one. I don't think the institute does look like that, and it looks kind of friendly now, and the website's friendly, and the coloring and everything. And so I think that's good. And I don't think we've lost anyone along the way that I'm aware of. The industry does keep changing, and I'm not sure whether craft is here to grow or here to stay at 8% or 10% or whatever, depending on the market. But it would probably employ more brewers than multinational. So it must be a place for continued listening and focus, because that's where our membership will be, rather than the few highly paid pensioned people in the multinationals. Which does bring me back to another point I would have said to somebody starting their careers in a smaller brewery is take and get your pension advice early, and do stick to a pension plan. That's nothing to do with the institute now. I'm off topic, but if I was giving advice to my younger self,
maybe that's an area for a new course for us.
Yeah, it might be. So, and anything else? I suppose the old IBD was far more focused on technical papers and brewing research and publication. That's less kind of less of a weighting in what the IBD visibly do now. But I don't know that there's a loss anywhere. Is that a challenge for the IBD, or are other publication modes
so I think it
adequate?
comes to the point that we were talking about earlier. So I think if we look at, well, we asked a question last year in the we do an annual survey, and we asked what values people associated with the IBD, and expertise was right up there, and we always need that. And so I think the work that people like Professor David Quain are doing on the JIB, and all the work that goes into the BDI, that has to be, and all the work the exam board do has to be kind of expert. That's the expectation. That's really important to us.
Yes.
Your other point about how the IBD presents itself. So I think it's really important that the members can see themselves within the organisation, so that we can, if somebody wants the kind of key academic points, yes, they should be able to find that. If somebody wants to just be inspired by somebody who changed their career and is finding their way, we should tell the member stories rather than just playing back what the IBD wants to say. The members should be able to see themselves within the organisation, and by doing that, I think we attract a really kind of broad church of different experiences and different levels of expertise and what have you. And one of the great things about my role is I get to do a bit of travel. We were at the Craft Brewing Convention in Las Vegas a couple of months back, and that was great because you'd have people coming up to you. Everybody knows the IBD. They would in different places, but so people know who we are. We just got to make sure that people can see themselves within us, and IBD stays relevant. I think that's super important for us.
Yeah, and I guess that's when I refer to the old the Incorporated Brewers Guild. I mean, that was very much the members' organization, and the IOB was kind of the professional and research and scientific organization. So the IBD, I think, is doing a great job of merging those two.
Yeah.
Are we a members' organization, or are we a scientific and blah blah blah? I think we are more of a members' organization, but in terms of making sure members gain really respectable, internationally accredited qualifications and skill and so on. So I think I basically would say the IBD has been set on the right track over the last few years, as far as I can see, and surprised me, by the way, in many ways. For example, the quality of the learning materials, and I mean, there's always room for little improvements here and there, but I think that was really high, and I was surprised how well that was done. I didn't have a hand in producing any of those materials, but I didn't have any problem, as it were, teaching with them straight away, and students did, So I think that was, to me, a real example of this is a new direction. I had nothing to do with it, but it's been done really well. And my experience as a tutor has been like that the support is there, the backup is there. If the internet fails me, within minutes, a fellow tutor will be in keeping the thing going. That sort of stuff counts for a lot and shouldn't be taken for granted. Just sheer kind of good management.
Well, I mean, that's such great feedback to get back to, and knowing the people who produce that learning material and the people who kind of work on those courses, they are perfectionists in their own right. So that doesn't surprise me. And the IBD is certainly very lucky that with its relatively small HQ staff, it has got people with those kind of technical skills, but also that kind of passion for getting it right. So that's great feedback. So thank you very much. Brilliant. Well, look, Ian, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and look forward to next time I'm across in Ireland. I'm not sure where the section dinner will be. Hopefully we'll get together and meet in person.
I think probably we did probably meet briefly on the southern section visit to Ireland. I think were you that was the first session, wasn't it?
No.
Okay, no, it does seem like I met you somewhere, but I can't remember.
I had to choose between Las Vegas or Southern Ireland, and we went across because I'd recently been at the Irish section.
Of course, yeah.
I thought, look, there are some people that I need to meet in the CBC, but yeah, there were nice choices to make. I'd have been happy at either place.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure, and I hope some of this is going to be of interest and useful to people.
I think it's been some really fascinating insights. So thank you very much. Thank you for all your input, and thanks for being such a great tutor as well.
It's always been a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.